Okay, so George will miss what we had to say about him. You can fill him in on that, Ned.
I'll let him know.
So Bob, how are you today?
I'm doing fine today. Catching up with things. I was watching a scientist who's up from Hawaii, but he was giving a talk at Notre Dame about 10 years hence, life in the universe, you know, and it's all about the asteroids and how we're going to mine them as we move into the future. And that's where we're going to get all the water we need in the future.
Water?
Quite
Wow.
interesting, yeah. It
Wow.
said that they're loaded with water. And so they're going to extract water from these asteroids that are in a particular belt in a particular place. And then that water, which is just tons of it, will go into what they're calling the gateway on the moon. So that all these guys that are going to be flying through outer space, you know, they can go and get the water they need to maintain their base on the moon. Quite fascinating.
And he thinks that's in the next 10 years.
Yes. Even
Okay.
before. They're in the process of building this first thing. And it's funded by a branch of NASA. It's doing all this stuff. And the guy was just really super good. Used to be a football player. Now he's kicking stuff into outer space.
Not Willie Galt, is it?
Well, but you know what? One of the things that is very interesting is that none of this would happen without people like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos.
I thought you were going to say Musk. Sorry.
Yeah, because none of the government agencies are capable of thinking like that. And they might be willing to fund it if somebody else is coming up with ideas like that. But, you know, they're the ones who are, I think, stimulating just very much of the direction that our space program and all of that is going. Here comes George Ferrick, Curious George.
Hi, guys. Hey, whoops, where am I? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
I hope you're not driving a car because it looks like you're in a house.
I'm in a house now, but I have to finish a quick phone call and then I'll join you again.
Okay, good.
Okay,
Meanwhile,
great.
here comes the other George. There he is. Hello, George.
Hi there.
Hey, George.
Greetings, Timothy.
Did you enjoy your stay at Providence Hospital?
No.
Did you have
They
cute
were nice
nurses?
people. I was just, you know, can I go home today?
Were the nurses cute?
He
They're
didn't
not
notice.
up to Cedar Sinai standards.
Oh my, what a critic.
Yeah, I was asked, George, I was asked how you were. Tim just asked the question generally, and I told him that you'd been in the hospital 3 days.
4.
4?
Yeah.
Holy moly. And I thought unnecessarily, but that's
I agree.
my opinion with respect to Providence. And that you're great. And that you have something on your brain.
Oh, nobody seems concerned. They said there were some cysts on the back of my brain, but appears to be no big deal. You know, I wouldn't worry about it, that type of thing. And then it came the neurologist who was appeared to me to be older than I am, with this difference. She speaks with a really pronounced Chinese accent and was quite difficult to understand. But to the degree that we could understand her, she was saying, don't dehydrate, don't dehydrate, don't dehydrate. Okay, but don't dehydrate. Drink plenty of water.
Oh, dry.
I'll
So,
drink to that.
yeah, but is this a typical male or is this just me? I hate water. I really don't like to drink water.
Well, I may be an untypical male because I really like water and tend to drink quite a bit of it.
No, good for you.
So, and drink it throughout the day, not particularly compulsively or anything. But that's just my thing.
You'll keep your brain from shrinking into a prune until.
Yeah, it also keeps you aware that you have a bladder.
Yeah.
Oh, true.
Well, my answer hitherto has always been, well, that's why there are ice cubes in martinis. What's the problem? That's water.
Yes, it
Um,
is. Yes.
So, but I find myself drinking fewer martinis, so I don't know.
Are you down to 2 a day now, George?
No, I'm down to maybe 3 a week.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
I don't know what happened, but I mean, this has been going on for 8 weeks, maybe, just steadily.
You're entering into the dimension of the kingdom.
No, I just figure it's a declining ability to enjoy life.
Speaking of enjoying life, I just got a phone call from Johnny Grimmer, which I did not answer because it was on, I don't know if it's his daughter's phone, Carol's phone, and it was from Las Vegas. So I thought, or registered in Las Vegas. So I thought it was a, spam or something. But it seems that all of his devices are victims of malware.
Gosh.
Oh,
And he's not able to do anything on any of them at the moment.
Wow.
So he can't join us. He can't
He
even
could by
use his
phone.
phone as a phone.
Jeez.
And does anybody have a landline anymore? We don't. I don't know if you guys do.
No.
Nope.
No.
we do. My spouse believes it'll be invaluable some night when we have to call 911.
And the phones are all dry, huh?
Well, if the phones are dead because of a nuclear explosion and all of that, 911 won't do you a hell of a lot of good anyway.
Yeah,
But the beauty, I think, of cell phones calling 911 is that they can pinpoint your exact location.
Yeah.
I
I
thought
think,
so.
I think probably where you live, that's the case. When you live up in the mountains the way we do, the best that they could do is to pinpoint your street, and so they tell you go out and have someone stand at the front of your driveway when the ambulance comes. So we'll do that. Hey, Frank.
Hello, Frank.
Hi, how are you?
Hey,
Hey, George.
how are you, sir?
Fine. You got a different setting this week.
Yes,
Good.
thank God.
I can imagine.
Yes, indeed. And I was just telling them John Grimmer will not be with us, and
Gary's coming in.
George Ferrick, I haven't heard from him.
Oh,
But George Ferrick joined for a minute, and then he said he had a phone call to make, and he'll be back. So,
Remember years ago, the Payne Weber ads, people would be in a busy meeting like we're in, and they get a phone call and they say, oh, it's my broker at Payne Weber. I've got to leave right away. Being in the brokerage business, I always envied that kind of creative ad.
and then the next thing, of course, was he's out on the golf course with his broker.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'd sent out something that I guess I saw in Crux about the new is it rector of the North American College? And I think
Yes.
Frank and Bob, you both went there, right?
Yes.
And I thought his comment about, and I don't know if I say it properly, that to kind of unteach these guys, the celebration of the Latin Mass. And I sent it to some friends of mine here that in my Cursillo group.
Hello, Gary.
Hey, Gary.
Good
Hey,
morning.
Gary.
Morning.
So I sent it to some of my friends in the Cursillo group, none of whom are priests, retired priests, ex-priests, whatever. And they wondered, where is and maybe this is too big of a question for our conversation, but where in truth is the impetus for the Latin Mass coming from? I mean, we use a term, the rad trads, the radical traditionalists, but as a layman, I'm confused as to what is the appeal of the Latin Mass to the laity.
Tradition.
Yeah, I mean,
Tradition.
and so do any of you guys have a thought about where the impetus is coming from? And go ahead, Tom, please.
I do, but I would probably occupy a fair amount of time in unfolding that thought. So I'd kind of like to save it until others have a thought, and then I can build on that.
Well, that's a great idea. I think it's a feeling of comfortableness and mystery and I don't know, for them, clarity and certainty.
Somewhere I read that what you think of the Latin Mass is what you think of the Vatican Council. Inversely, I guess.
You know, George, I think that might be the case for people like, I don't know, young priests and things like that. I'm not sure about the lay people. I don't know that they know that much about the Second Vatican Council, and I think a lot of young people are attracted to the Latin Mass. I think, Tim, you said that before. And I know that the people who I like, Salvador Cordileone, who's the Archbishop of San Francisco, he thinks that, is the most beautiful thing. I like to tell him beauty is in the eye of the beholder, but a lot of young people seem to be attracted to it. My sister says that she goes to St. Dominic's Parish in San Francisco, that a lot of young families have gone to this guy, Joe Ilo. He's a San Francisco priest, but very much into the Latin. And I think that if it's young people who are attracted, I've always thought that it might be because they've grown up in a very turbulent world and they're looking for something solid and maybe different. I think, Ned, you're right. They want something that's different from, the turmoil around them, and maybe the Latin Mass has that otherworldly feel that attracts them. I don't know that the young people would say would be anti-Vatican II. I think young priests are. I mean, but I don't think I don't know about lay people. So
I know a substantial number of lay people. My son is either close to or has crossed the line into this rad trad group. But with respect to the Vatican Council, lots of his friends are inversely, as George says, attracted to the Vatican Council, as they are so much in favor of the Latin Mass. But my son said, so I picked up the documents of Vatican II, and they're really good. Wow. So I'm rethinking things then.
Bishop Barron on several occasions he'll just, in defending the council, he will say, I forget how many major constitutions there were, But, and here was the vote on this one, you know, and it's like 2,600 to 10. And, you know, the majorities by which these constitutions and declarations passed were just,
Yeah.
it was like a Chicago precinct or something, you know, they're just so one-sided.
George, that's partly because Paul VI wanted to make sure that the council did not, I guess, divide the church, because there was a significant number of, certainly in Rome and that sort of thing, that wanted to keep, they didn't like the council. I think, what was his name? Who was that guy? Ottaviani.
Ottavian.
He was afraid that at the end of the council, he wanted to remain Catholic. So
Yeah.
Paul VI, there's a great book, What Really Happened to Vatican II, but who's that Jesuit? O'Malley? He's
O'Malley, yeah.
John O'Malley. Yeah.
It's a very good, it's a paperback description of what really happened at Vatican II. It's very interesting historical analysis, but so Paul VI wanted to he broadened the scope of some of those documents and wanted to get a lot of the more conservative agenda into the documents so that more people would vote for the documents. That leaves people like my bishop able to kind of reinterpret the Vatican II kind of the way they want to, you know, and they also have a distrust of what we call the spirit of Vatican II. And anybody, I believe anybody who lived through Vatican II, and that would include Bob and Frank and I mean Tom and myself, who were sticking with it. I think Ned, you too. You know, there's a very definite spirit, the Second Vatican Council, that's not not simply in the documents.
Yep.
Tom, you told us that in that thing about the guy about fire, the tradition as fire, you know, keep the fire burning. You know, there's my bishop does not believe in the spirit of Vatican II. He believes that it's in the documents. And I don't, but he doesn't know it because he was too young to know it. That's what I think.
I think there's two things that would strike me. One was there was that resistance group in the council itself. And early on, there was the refusal of the archbishop from down in Africa, the white bishop that.
Really?
Pardon?
Early?
No, this was the guy that resisted. I'm not remembering his name now, but he virtually just separated out and was running the church his own way. And I think eventually Paul VI got tired of him, and so he was hoisted out. And he wanted to be out. He wanted to resist. I think the other thing is that you have that mindset of people like Burke and others that for some reason think that past way, you know, had a lot of things, and we've lost these really precious dimensions. And so he'd wrap himself in the long veils and all that kind of stuff. I think there's the home educated people, the families that are educating their people at home. For some reason, I think they feel they have to be sequestered. You know, they have to be just not let their kids be exposed to bad teaching that they feel apparently they're picking up from the church. I think E.W. Tien has a significant impact on that kind of thing, that this is an alternative and it's a better alternative. And a lot of people have bitten that. And then I think even the young people, I don't know if it's, they just want a quiet time to go to church and something's happening up there. And meanwhile, they're saying their prayers and hopefully they're reading the scriptures and that sort of thing. So I think all of those factors are there. And it started to take off even more seriously, I think, when Benedict kind of gave them the run of the road, you know, that let everybody have the Latin Mass if they wanted, and it got out of hand. And so that's why Francis is saying enough, you know, and it's over. You know, the liturgy of the Catholic Church is the liturgy that was established in Vatican II. And he's trying to bring them back, and he'll let the people that are locked into it maybe hang on, but he doesn't want that multiplied as the opportunities people would have to will go to mass, but it'll always be the Latin mass. He doesn't want it being promoted.
To go back to the initial comment about the new rector in Rome, my understanding is that the seminarians in Rome, prior to Francis's motu proprio, were trained in how to celebrate the mass and the tradition, what is called EFT, the extraordinary form.
Yeah.
Wow.
And they stopped that when the motu proprio was issued. And so I think that's probably what Monsignor Powers, I think is his name, is referring to. I think the Latin Mass has there's all sorts of reasons why people want it, you know. I mean, after all, we're Catholics, we're somewhat conservative anyway.
Yeah.
And some people, I think it's simply a kind of a antiquarian nostalgia. I think some of the younger people, I think it's interesting because they've never experienced it. And some of them are naturally conservative anyway, on a whole host of issues. And so they find their attractions in the same people who are drawing them to the thing. So I think there's a whole series of reasons. I think what has happened is the rad trads have kind of made it a talisman of their position. And that comes with antipathy to Vatican II. But, you know, you're right about the spirit. You know, Weigel wrote a book, something about history. I forget what the title was. And he said there were no themes at Vatican II. There was no integrating, which of course, it just simply tells you there weren't any that he liked.
Right.
You know, certainly the fundamental nature of baptism as the innovating principle for the people of God and the entire church is an incredible theme throughout the documents of Vatican II.
Yeah.
The other things that are important, I think, is how the documents were done. You know, Ottaviani and company simply rewrote them according to the old way and handed them to the bishops thinking that would be it. So, for example, the document on the church, Ottaviani's version began, chapter 1 was the hierarchy.
Right.
Now, chapter 1 is the mystery of the church.
Right.
Chapter 2 is the people of God. Chapter 3 is the hierarchy, and chapter 4 is the laity. So there's a more organic kind of understanding of what the church is. So not only in the words of the documents was the message sent, but in the way that the thing was put together. Same thing happened, according to the first volume of biography on Benedict XVI. He used his platform that Cardinal Frings of Cologne provided him because he was Frings's theological expert. And the first version of the document on Revelation was De Fontibus Revelationis, the fonts of Revelation was chapter 1. And Ratzinger said, well, don't you think we ought to talk about what's being revealed first? And so he is the one who got it changed so that the first chapter is Verbum Dei, the word of God. And then you can talk about, you know, the fonts of Revelation. So a number of those kinds of things that happened in the council send as strong a message in some ways as what the documents themselves say. And I think this whole notion of the spirit of the council is really important.
Yeah, that's one of those things, Frank, the Prenotanda or something like that, or something like that. As much as the documents, it's important to look at all the material
Right.
that went into the documents.
Right.
Something like that. Yeah.
And so Ned, your son does he attend a Latin mass?
No,
Oh, I misunderstood you then. I
No,
misunderstood.
no, you didn't misunderstand me. He's very much for the Latin Mass, and he is surrounded by people like that, and they really are irascible about it. They're combative, and they read or are connected with in some way the church militant.
Oh my God. Oh my gosh.
And that's yeah, it's a crazy place. Anyway, I think, having talked with a lot of his folks that come to his home, that there's a big element of fear.
They said I'm in a meeting, but what's happening?
In them, great fear, and they want to
Hello?
ring the wagons and protect
okay.
themselves and protect their children. I think Gary said that.
No, I'm in a meeting.
His wife, who is an amazingly intelligent, articulate, organized, etc., mom with 6 kids, is homeschooling the children. And one of the big reasons for homeschooling is this fear of contamination, taint from the secular world. What do you think, Tom?
I have all kinds of thoughts, and I'll try to articulate a couple of them in a way that might, I hope, make sense. One of which is, I would dearly love to see a little more, no, not a little more, a lot more attention to accuracy in terminology. Because what we are not talking about is the Latin Mass, as in Mass in Latin. What we are talking about is the Tridentine liturgy as found in the Missale Romanum of, what was it, 1962?
Mhm.
You know, so to label that as Latin Mass is a misnomer, because the rite, according to, you know, the current ritual, the Novus Ordo, as it is sometimes called in Latin, you know, envisions celebration in Latin. It was never, ever the intention of the council that Latin be totally shoved aside by vernacular. And I think that the popular movement to eliminate Latin in favor of the vernacular was kind of a mistake, because what we did, it's sort of like in redecorating the house, you throw out some paintings that your grandparents had that turned out to be really valuable, but now they're buried in a landfill. I think that we would be better off, and this is kind of getting into my second point. First, end of the first point is, I would really like to see a more precision of terminology. When we are, what we usually call the Latin Mass is actually the Tridentine Rite. As of Pope Francis's motu proprio, it is no longer the extraordinary form. Francis did away with the distinction between the ordinary form and the extraordinary form, for one thing, and basically said that the form of the one form of the Latin Rite, and we even call it the Latin Rite, the Church of the West, the Roman Rite. Okay, the one form of that is the Missal of Paul VI. And there, then in the motu proprio, he allows for limited use at the discretion of the bishop of the Tridentine Rite, Mass being celebrated according to the Tridentine Rite. that does raise an awful lot of questions that are beyond the scope of here. To what extent is the Tridentine rite, for example, one of those questions, just the way of celebrating Mass? To what extent does it include all the other sacraments? Does following the Tridentine rite do away with the rites of initiation as articulated, as ordered by the Second Vatican Council? To what extent does it influence the calendar? Many of the Tridentine rite people also are following the liturgical calendar that was in effect before 1969. So all of those kinds of things are part of that question. And my own feeling, one of the big things regarding the young people today wanting to buy that package of the Tridentine order, the pre-Vatican II order of the liturgy, I think one of the elements of it is that they are rejecting much of what our generation held to be of value, and that might be labeled under the spirit of Vatican II. To some extent, I do think that the kids of today, the younger radtrads of today who do not remember Vatican II, have no experience of it, and whose parents may well have been quite young during Vatican II. They are doing a lot the same thing to us that we did to those old fuddy-duddies when we were first ordained. And I think that that's part, it doesn't explain the whole thing, but then again, our rebellion against the old church after Vatican II is not just explained by the rebelliousness of those times either. But I think that there is something to that. Now, to my mind, that explains a good bit of the attractiveness among young people of Vatican, of the pre-Vatican church. One other thing that
But
I
Tom,
think,
just very quickly, there's a big difference in that the changes that you guys were tormenting the fuddy-duddies with were changes that had the wind of the times and the wind of the Holy Spirit behind them.
Right.
And there's nothing like that blowing in favor of this reactionary approach to the liturgy.
I beg to differ, because one's perception of the wind of the Holy Spirit is very, very subjective.
Okay.
One of the things that we have, and they firmly believe, no, they've got the wind of the Holy Spirit behind them.
Yeah.
We're the ones who are we're the ones who are the spawn of Satan.
Yeah, but Tom, the wind of the Holy Spirit, we have the documents of the Second Vatican Council.
Well, we've just spent a little time talking about the fact that some of the elements of the spirit of the Vatican Council are not actually articulated in the text of the Vatican Council. And the Vatican Council's, for example, you ask about what are the two main features of, when you ask people, what are the two main changes in the liturgy as a result of Vatican II? Number one would be masses in the vernacular, and number two is the altar facing the people. Neither one of them were actually mandated as such by the Second Vatican Council. The Vatican Council did open the door to a greater use of the vernacular in the liturgy, but the wholesale change from Latin to the vernacular that was already in effect, 6 years after the council, I don't think that was actually envisioned by the Council Fathers. But and my estimation is it was probably, the whole change was done too fast. It did not allow for an organic change to take place. And many people, are going to distrust revolutions. And of course, revolution was in the air at that time. So I'm not so sure that, there was a lot of non-reception. How would I say? A lot of external compliance with the changes in the liturgy at that time that were not always matched by internal reception or real understanding. And I've got a lot of anecdotes about that. One of which is the liturgists in my parishes, they were obsessed with, how do we get people to participate? How do we get people to do the stuff they're supposed to do during Mass? And what was missing, I think, was that participation has to be an internal engagement first, that then gives birth to the external manifestation of it. And the external manifestation in turn reinforces that internal engagement. So those two things are pretty intimately linked in a reciprocal relationship with each other. And the emphasis that I found in my own parishes among many and particularly of the lay leaders who got gung-ho about the changes in the liturgy, sort of concentrated a bit too much on getting external compliance rather than internal formation.
Tom, I would agree with you there. I think of the documents of Vatican II, however, they're not a detailed listing of all the things that should flow out of the direction that the documents were affirming. And so I think, yes, there are things that aren't in the documents, such as facing the, having the Mass facing the altar, though that was part of the long tradition of the Church. I do agree that I think that the movement into the new missal, the new way of celebrating the Mass, it happened too fast. And I think, and I would say in my own diocese, my own experience, I was not a pastor at that point, but I think that we presented at once, and so we're making the change and live with it,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another element precisely along those lines, and then I'll shut up, but I do have quite a bit more to say too, but let Gary come in. But right along those lines, the whole change happened not organically, but very, very top down. In other words, what they thought was a good pace of change was that there would be a period of experimentation, and then the bishops would make a report, and then they would finalize the change. Well, the experimentation in some places did not really happen, and in other places it just went ahead with a momentum that went in all directions, I think not really envisioned by the council. The use of beer and pretzels for the Eucharist rather than bread and wine, and stuff like that. But
did that really happen?
Is that true?
Yeah, there were those who did.
But
Really?
it seems to me that some of that stuff has the tone of Ronald Reagan's welfare queens. That because it gets talked about so much, it would have you think that it happened and happened and happened and happened, rather than being a kind of aberration that happened perhaps more than we wanted it to do, but not an aberration that was totally out of whack for such a major change.
Yeah, but those small instances as you
Yeah,
say, they got
yeah.
magnified,
Yeah.
especially in the reports made to Rome,
Yeah.
because I think in the early 70s, when all of these books were being prepared as a result of some probably good experimentation, they were promulgated as of the first Sunday of
Mhm.
Advent. You may no longer do it this way, you must do it that way. And, you know, that's the sort of thing that, from hindsight, I feel is a setup for failure. That
So-
top-down directive of reforms that are supposed to be good for you and enable you to participate better. And
But
All over you.
Tom, that makes perfect sense.
I agree.
But does it make perfect sense 50 years later?
okay,
I mean,
it's laying the groundwork. It's laying the groundwork for a foundation that remains on which the rad trads now are building. In other words, I think what they're building is probably building on is and the ongoing sense of unease or the ongoing sense of conflict that the original implementation gave rise to. And let's face it, the quote progressive voices at that time were pretty effective in trying to marginalize and put down the contrary voices. Now it's interesting, the contrary voices tend to be able to shout the loudest.
But in the late 60s, the contrary voices at least knew something. These rad trads don't know anything.
Well, that's a judgment that that probably needs to be nuanced a little more.
Well, okay.
What they know is selective. I'll grant that, but sometimes what we knew was selective too. There is one other point that I would really like to make, and this could be a little controversial too. About
That's
the
why we
ongoing.
have you. That's why we have you on these Zoom calls.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Besides the fact that he sets it all up.
Yeah.
Well,
Right.
that's true. You know, with a touch of a trackpad.
You should have warned us new guys, Tom.
Yeah, well, you know how Zoom operates. That. Where was I? You know, I felt very early on that Marshall McLuhan. How many of you know him?
The medium is the message.
Right. Marshall McLuhan had quite a bit to say about this that I think is relevant. For one thing, the medium is the message. If the medium by which God is communicated to us gets muddled up, the message gets muddled up. So that to my mind is one thing, but more significant. Remember, Marshall McLuhan made a big distinction between hot and cool media.
Mhm.
Okay, the distinction between hot and cool media is that a hot medium is a pretty much a one-way communication of information that does not depend on the response. It's a little bit sort of like my lecturing right now. What I'm doing is very, very hot because I am simply talking and none of the rest of you are at this moment. So that is a hot medium. A cool medium is participative, like a conversation around a dinner table, extended into, let's say, the world of media. Zoom with everybody unmuted, theoretically is a cool medium, because what's happening there is an interchange. If the director of this were to mute everybody and continue talking, it would suddenly become a hot medium. So that's the way I see that distinction. Now, I think there is a paradox here. This is my own opinion that I've developed. Actually, I wrote about this probably back in the 1970s. So it's something that's been alive in my mind. That theoretically, prior to Vatican II, the Roman liturgy was a hot medium. The clergy do their own thing. People are watching. And they're there because the clergy are doing something holy. And we can, we can elaborate on that in whatever direction we want to, as sacramentally and real presence and all that stuff. But it is the clergy doing something and the people being passive. That would be the very definition of a hot medium. The intent, I think, of the Second Vatican Council in talking about the participation of all Christians through their baptism in a liturgical act that has different levels of participation, but that is essentially the members of the body of Christ actively, consciously participating in this one action. That was basically an attempt to say, we need to let this become a cool medium. We need to look for participation. We need to encourage some kind of a dialogue, some kind of a genuine mutual exchange in this. And I think that was, to my mind, that was the intention behind revising the various forms. But the experienced result of most people, the ordinary Catholic, and I'm just going to say the ordinary Catholic. I'm not going to say lay versus clergy or whatever, but the experience of the ordinary Catholic was exactly the opposite, coming to Mass. And here's what I mean. In the, quote, old liturgy, I, as a Catholic coming to Mass, was genuinely engaged in that Mass on my level. I could do whatever I wanted to. Ideally, it would be uniting my heart, my mind to the sacred action that the priest was performing, but I am becoming one with him through following in a missalette.
It's missal, yeah.
Following in your missal. I could become one with him in union with Mary, praying the rosary. But I could do it in my own way. Or if I wanted to drop out a little bit, I could think about what we were having for dinner, or think about the ball game this afternoon, or as ushers were wont to do, slip outside during the sermon and have a smoke. In other words, I could participate however I wanted to. For me, that experience was extremely cool. I was engaged at my own level. Now, along comes Vatican II, and the implementation of Vatican II, priests by and large tended not to follow the process of implementation. They just basically did in their parish what the bishop told them to do. And the main commentary and the main education that many of them got, and many of the lay people got, was the news reports in the secular media. So the experience of many priests, I think, definitely not all, maybe not even the majority, but the experience, I think, of the majority of lay people was, I'm told something to do, I'm told to change, okay, I'll do it. Maybe I agree with it, maybe I want to learn more about it, maybe I'll resist it, maybe I don't like it, but my own way of participating in the Mass has been changed. Some people welcomed that. I think a lot of people went along with it with maybe some misgivings, and some people, may have complied externally, but not internally. But their experience was going from, I could go to Mass and sort of allow myself to engage in whatever way I felt moved to do, to now you will stand, and now you will turn to page 347, and now you will sing verses 3, 5, and 9 of such and such. In other words, it became very highly directive. What was supposed to be an experience of greater freedom in participation actually became an experience of regimentation for many, many people. And not everybody wanted to stand after communion, and nobody respected the fact that I wanted to, I wanted those moments after communion to do what I've been doing for most of my life. And nobody respected that. And I think that also gave rise to a good bit of resistance. Am I talking about the whole picture? No, I don't think so. But I think what I am saying does hit somewhere close to the heart of the experience of those, let's say 30 years ago, who were going through that first 20 years of integration after Vatican II. And what we have now is still fruit from the same tree. Okay, I'll shut up at this point.
I just checked one thing that you said back there about the two most important things, and I forget what they were. One was going into the Vulgate, the regular language of the people, and then the other turning the altar around. But I think another highly significant thing was the modification of the scriptures and a much thorough and wider exposure to the scriptures. That I think most people, it was always Matthew and Paul, and that's what every Sunday, every year, it was the same. And so the richness of the scriptures, and then I think in the way that they were presented to people and are still presented to people. Joshua, this is a reading from the book of Joshua. They have no idea who Joshua is.
Yeah.
They don't know the story.
Just a little comment on that. I absolutely, totally agree. One of the, to my mind, one of the major influences or major benefits of the liturgical change and the switch from Latin to a language that's intelligible is the scriptural revolution. However, if you were to take a poll of the majority of Catholics who were in sync with, who supported the changes, as well as the people resisting it, I think what's your major impression of what happened to the liturgy after Vatican II? Scripture in their consciousness, while it should play a big part, probably would not rank very high on that poll.
I think you're right.
What would rank high on that poll would be, well, now it used to be in Latin, now it's in English. It used to be, we only saw the priest's back, except occasionally when he turned around to say something about dominoes. And now now he's facing us. And sometimes I think you would get the impression, as in my first parish and my first pastor, Frank Osborne, who dutifully moved the altar forward so we all could celebrate Mass facing the people for the first time in his priesthood, which at that point was probably 35 years. First time ever he saw what people were doing during Mass, and he didn't like it.
Chewing gum.
And he let them know that he didn't like it. So, and I, yeah, that's kind of a fun little anecdote, but Mass
But how
facing
do
the
we
people
get,
was not necessarily the panacea that it was, that we'd like to think it was.
I think that the change in language and the movement to the altar were the two most obvious changes,
That's what I'm saying.
but they're not. I think what Bob is putting his finger on is not only that the richness of the scriptures is offered in a way that it hadn't been before, but also the architecture has begun to change, and the relationship of the Word of God to the liturgical action is made much more intimate. It's even, you no longer have, the old pulpits where you climbed up into the pulpit and stood there, etc. You'd have to almost look like this to see where the altar was.
Yeah.
So I think that there's been a number of those things that have happened that have worked into the consciousness. The other thing is, I'm not sure, Tom, that I'm hearing whether or not, well, I don't know what I'm hearing. There's two things. Is change good?
Mhm.
And then, for instance, do you welcome the change, or do you think that the value of the change has been lessened or obliterated, etc., because of the way it was done? I think they're two different questions.
They are very much two different questions.
Right.
And one of the things I'm trying to point out is that they are two different questions.
They're what?
One of the things I'm trying to point out is that they are two different questions.
Yeah.
And that the second part of that question, that the way it was done has to a great extent negatively influenced the effect of the change on the people who should be benefiting from it.
Well, I would argue that, obviously every change, when you look back 50 years, it could have been done better.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is that if we think now that it should have been done more organically, the people weren't of a mindset vis-a-vis the church to have anything done organically. It was handed out from the top. That's how it happened.
Yeah, precisely.
And so the question is, how do you move a large number of people from A to B?
Yeah.
In a way that's effective. And we can argue forever. Some people say that it takes 100 to 150 years for a council to really seep down into the church.
Yeah.
So, we're not done yet. And we're seeing, for example, some simple things. Like I noticed recently, someone wrote an article on the priesthood and they talked about the elevation. Well, in the Novus Ordo, there is no elevation. The word isn't even used.
No, it isn't.
Because you don't have to lift up the hand. It says you show it to the people.
Right.
And so the changes kind of get into the grain down even at that level. And I guess the bigger question is, how are we doing now if we have a look out at 150 years?
Mm-hmm. That would be a good question.
Yeah.
I think George is taking us with
Yeah.
him.
I think he's going to wash his car, and we get to watch him wash his car.
Here we go, guys. I'm going to turn this around so you don't see anything. How's that?
Yeah. Well, no, I think it'll be more fun to see where you're going.
I'm actually heading up to towards Petaluma. I'm going to Novato.
Ah,
Yeah, my brother John lives in Santa Rosa,
oh, okay.
so we're
Right.
meeting halfway. Yeah.
Oh, good.
Good.
And is there a way, Welbers, that you can link into his dash cam on this call so that we can see how his driving is?
That requires his permission.
I can promise it'll be Vatican II driving.
No.
Okay,
I'm not going to get upset at anybody who pulls in front of me. I'm going to be kind and let them go and think they have a good reason.
And don't go east.
George, just remember, whenever you come to an intersection and you have to turn, go left.
yeah.
And so I'm not
Unfortunately,
familiar with.
my route is, I have one left and then
Well,
Well, back to these changes though, Tom, I think these might have been very big deals in 1967. But like, you know, my kids, I think they're vaguely aware that the Mass used to be in Latin. And that's all the change they know about. You know, Mass used to be in Latin, now it's in English.
right, that, in a sense, that's the point that I'm making. That
And
the
I
change
guess
from
Bob
Latin to
was thinking
English
the same
was
one.
just one part, you know, I feel a very poorly handled part of the entirety of an organic movement that should have been organic towards the bringing of the celebration of the Mass into a way that engages the participation of all of the assembly on their own on their own ways of being able to participate.
But I think that people under the age of X, 50, 40, I'm not sure what X is, that are all hot and bothered are not hot and bothered because things were too abrupt in 1967. It's a different kind of animus that they've got going.
Yeah, it is. You know, and I'm kind of talking about the going back and trying to identify and then move into, okay, helping us to understand the present by looking at the past.
Yeah.
The animus that they've got now is has its roots in what was going on before they were capable of reading a biased news report.
Say that again?
See ya. Take care.
Yeah, the animus that they have now has its roots in what was happening before they were born. I think it's, you know, otherwise you've got a disconnect. You know, you're trying to look at what's happening now and asking why, but not going back and looking at the roots.
I'm not sure those are the roots.
Okay.
Now, you know, it's a blanket statement, and I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know what I do think the roots are. Oh, I know one thing. My brother-in-law, the recently retired bishop of San Bernardino, Riverside, he said with teenagers, a lot of it is they don't think that there's enough reverence in church or in prayer or towards the Eucharist. You know, bishop, you know, you're just not reverent enough. That somehow plays in. You know, it's just a cultural moment, I guess.
Yeah, and I very, very much agree with that. And you know, the one priest, and he will remain anonymous, but the
Oh,
one priest
why?
that I know who was obsessed with the reverence of everybody
so
around
gorgeous.
him during the mass
Yeah.
It's so pretty.
Oh, good.
was himself exuding signs of inattention and irreverence throughout his celebration of Mass. And he was doing that unconsciously, but you know, you look at him celebrating the Mass and especially you look at him during Mass, the way that he would be trying to enforce reverence on the altar servers, for example, or the other ministers. And you'd say, hey, there's a disconnect here.
Um,
So again, that's only an anecdote that when you talk about reverence, there can be a disconnect between outward forms of reverence. Do they necessarily arise from and indicate internal reverence? And vice versa.
yeah, I think a lot of it, I mean, I'm nostalgic for an era when American Catholics were, generally speaking, on the same page. You know, aren't we all? Maybe we weren't on the same page, but we thought we were. You know, the extreme importance today of the local bishop in the life of the diocese. It didn't matter so much in 1958, did it? I mean, who was it? Somebody recently was saying that somebody has written that we pay, Francis, I guess it was, we pay entirely too much attention to who our local bishop is and his quirks and so forth. And, you know, they certainly have them, Tim.
Yeah.
But maybe that's part of it, is we're a more unsettled church.
Yeah, and all that I'm maintaining is that it is a complex thing that you can't get one unified explanation for. But there
Well,
are
yeah.
a lot of considerations when you're looking into the roots and the origins of this. And I think one of the things that I'm trying to do is to point out some things that I see as factors in this development from then until now that often are overlooked when we try to get a handle on what the hell happened. And I'm not saying that I'm, you know, this is the way it is in a literal linear progression, that this caused that. But what I'm saying is, you know, I think there are some things that are not attended to that we may need to pay attention to and see if there's lessons we can learn from them.
I'll bet you, I don't want to monopolize this further, but Ned Chavira's brother-in-law, good guy, except he's crazy. He's you know, one of the folks we're talking about. And I don't know that he's suffering from, you know, whiplash as a result of a sudden change, so much as he is from a paranoid. What was the guy's name, Tom, that was in charge of this? Bugnini? Was that his name?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I've sat there with the brother-in-law listening to how Bugnini was an agent of Universal Freemasonry. And stuff like that, you know, and that's not because one fine Sunday we weren't calling it the X Sunday after Pentecost anymore. We were calling it the X Sunday of ordinary time. You know, it's not, it's just a crazy view of the world, I fear.
Yeah, well, the Bugnini, you know, those accusations against Bugnini came while he was still the secretary and for all intents and purposes director of the liturgical changes under Paul VI. so he was being vilified at that time. That vilification, fake unsubstantiated accusations, they're still persisting in those who are grasping for reasons to reject all of this stuff.
Yeah, just a question, and then I promise I'll shut
Yeah.
up for at least a while. As I understand it, the Latin liturgy doesn't follow what the rest of us are doing with the reading of the scriptures through the liturgical year. So if you went to mass at we call it Tridentine church on Wednesday, you're going to hear the gospel that's used for the proper of virgins. And then the next day for the proper of, proper of confessors.
Yeah.
And the
When
day
you went to
after
mass
that-
as a kid, you heard you followed that lectionary.
That's right.
And they still
maybe
follow
there
that
would be 15 gospel readings all year, I would think.
Well, there were a few more than
Virgins,
that. but-
confessors, martyrs, priests, doctors of the church, bishops, and you'd run out of categories.
And there are some in that crowd that say, that particular choice of readings in that lectionary are so constitutive of our faith that we shouldn't have muddied it with throwing in other stuff.
What, the prudent virgins with their lamps? That's like at the heart of...
Whatever, but I'm just saying, this is what they are saying.
Mhm.
Yes,
Well,
you-
I don't agree with it either, but I'm going to
Me,
shut up too, so.
Okay, let me ask you, we got 4 priests here, and it's glorious. Do you know any younger priests, any of the 4 of you, who are proponents of the Latin Mass? Or is you
Yes,
do?
of course.
Okay.
Yes.
Do they, Gary, what do they, as a celebrant, I'm trying to understand. You guys spent millions of years studying Latin. And so I'm sure as you were saying the Mass in Latin, you internally were understanding the words and the terminology.
Yeah,
Do
right.
Do these, well, okay, but at least you could translate it. But do these younger guys have an appreciation and understanding of the Latin that they are saying during these masses? That's one question. And then what is the appeal to them of saying a mass in Latin? I'd like to get into the heads of these young guys, and I don't have any ability to do it.
I don't think it's any different from what we said already. First of all, I don't know. I never said Mass in Latin. By the time I became, maybe Frank and Bob, I don't know, but Tom, by the time you were ordained a year before me, because I went my own little route and ended up in Santa Rosa. But my masses were always in English. I think I've said 2 or 3 Latin masses in my life.
Wow.
I've never had to deal with that. And I don't know what these young guys do. Other than what I've already said, I just think they have a nostalgia. I think, Bob, you said that. They have a nostalgia for something, for all these reasons we've talked about. And in young priests, it's definitely kind of an anti-Vatican II sort of thing. And they're fixed on it. And I don't know, Frank, you see that in Boston, I suppose, and Bob maybe in Youngstown, I don't know. But
I have not had an in-depth sit-down, face-to-face discussion with a young priest about this. But I have, a younger priest who's a friend. He's a little older because when I came back to the ministry, I spent a year at Pope St. John Seminary in Weston, which is for older men preparing to be priests. So he's maybe in his 40s. He's my daughter's age. He's around 42, I think. So, but he's a special case because he was an Anglican
Mhm.
And he came in to the Church of the Advent, which is
Right.
the largest Anglo-Catholic church in Boston.
Okay,
And he has other roots. He has roots in a parish where basically the parish is oriented towards that form of the mass. And so that even, as Tom mentioned, even the Novus Ordo is at times said in the Novus Ordo said in Latin, celebrated in Latin, and sometimes the Novus Ordo is celebrated with its back to the people. To get all these kind of different, and I think the bishop, for instance, I think is reluctant to move into this setting. There's a lot of reasons for that. But it would seem to me that it'd be up to the bishop to sit down with them and talk about this. But the bishop is kind of hands off because there's a number of other oddities in that setting. So I think they pick up some of this stuff as they go along. And I do not think that, I'm interested to hear that Monsignor Power said about unlearning. I do not think that American seminaries have embraced the Second Vatican Council.
I tend to agree. I mean, because I wonder what happened. Well, you know, I think maybe St. Patrick's Seminary in Menlo Park did at one point, but now it's different because Salvador Corleone has taken over St. Patrick's Seminary for San Francisco and some of the Bay Area counties. Monsignor Powers, he's the new rector of NAC.
Yeah,
NAC.
yeah.
And what did he say? I missed the first part.
Someone quoted him. I didn't. Was it you, George, or someone who said that he said they had to unlearn?
it was in the article that I sent. It was in the
Okay.
article in Crux that,
Okay,
yeah, that he was being very responsive to motu proprio, you know, and that it was just not going to be part of their curriculum.
right.
Well, that's the current rector took that stance as soon as Francis put it out.
Right.
This new guy, he had a career. I think he wound up at one of the Anderson operations that was out of New York. So he was ordained late. I think he was ordained in 97 or something like that. And so he had a career behind him, and he knew big organizations and that sort of thing. You know, and then he became a priest, and he's been the vicar general, I think, of Bridgeport. So he has a very different sense, and I think a much more contemporary sense is what I'm picking up. And he has to, I mean, it's been stopped, and he's not going to let it go further, but the guys that really bought into it, maybe in the first or second or third year of theology, he's going to have to get them turning around the bend in whatever years they're still going to be there. I think there are a lot of seminaries in the country, this is my grasp, I couldn't enumerate them, but I'll just use Cincinnati as an example. I mean, it is backwards. It is backwards. And happily, our diocese is sending guys up to Cleveland. And I think Cleveland is not bought into that. I'm not aware in my diocese of any parish that is doing a Latin Mass regularly.
Okay.
Or at all. I don't know that anybody's ever done it, but there is a very conservative, let's go back to the old way, let's put the tabernacle right at the back of the church and all that sort of thing, and redo the construction the way that the church, some are putting in, communion fences up there. I mean, there is some of that. I think we're pretty free of it, though.
Gosh,
Cardinal O'Malley tells an interesting story in his new book about an altar rail, about the Irish lady, Mrs. Brady, who went to her pastor, and she was well known in town for having been the owner of what's the Irish politely called a bad house. Use your imagination. And so she wanted to get in good favor with God and to update her obituary. So she went to the priest and she said that she would pay for a new altar rail, the finest Spanish wood and woodwork, etc. Very, very top of the line, etc. And the priest drew himself up to full height and said, do you think that I will allow my parishioners to kneel down and receive the precious body and blood of Christ from the results of debauchery and corruption? And she said to him, sure, Father, she said, you know, the one who came in and bought the anointment to bathe our Lord's feet. Where do you think she got the money? From selling apples?
That's cute.
That is wonderful.
Frank, I wanted to ask you just, I asked this last time. I don't want to totally sidetrack this conversation, but what did you do aside from being the prodigal son? How did you, when you left the priesthood and then when you came back, I don't know what you did for work, or because you certainly have kept up with, the theology and documents and things like that. And you probably, you went to mass. I don't know if you went to mass or not, or as a layman, or what you're, because then when you said one time when you left and you came back and realized how little the Second Vatican Council had been implemented, I'm just interested in hearing what your experience
Me
was.
too.
Yeah, share Frank.
Well, when I left, I actually, I started, I went 10 days as a substitute teacher in the schools in South Boston during the great busing controversy. Very interesting. And then I went to work for the state and the Secretary of State. And then I worked for 4.5 years for Paul Tsongas when he was a US Senator. He ran for president against 1992. And ironically, his 2 daughters just moved up into the house down the street here from the parish. And I hadn't seen them since they were children. Then I went to work for Northrop, the aerospace company, which some people throw back at me these days. I was the director of ethics and business ethics for the corporation. That's when I was in Los Angeles for 13 years. And I retired from there because my wife got a stroke and I had to take care of her. There were 12 years of that. And so yes, we went to church regularly. And, I read, I didn't read anything systematically, but I was.
May I ask, where did you go to church when you lived in LA?
St. Maximilian Kolbe in Westlake Village.
Oh, okay.
Peter O'Reilly.
Peter O'Reilly. He lives up the street from me right now.
Yeah. Well, Peter and I are good friends. We still talk. So he's in Redondo Beach now, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Like I say, up the street from me.
Yeah.
That's where Tommy is. Tom's in Redondo. You can see by his tan.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
and the palm trees out the window.
Yeah.
And then my late wife taught at Pascal Baylon in Thousand Oaks.
Okay.
Monsignor George was the pastor there. Dave Heaney was the pastor there.
Right.
And I knew Jim Staley because he used to help out at Maximilian.
Yeah. Okay.
Did you know Dick Dornan?
No.
Wasn't he a deacon at?
Could have been after me, George.
Yeah.
And Father Anslow, who used to be the canon lawyer.
Tom
Oh,
Anslow.
yeah.
Tom Anslow. Yeah. He died fairly soon after I was there, etc.
Mhm.
So then I was involved with Northrop. I started off here in the next town to where I am now, which had a Northrop unit, and we got in trouble with the government. And so I was running the business ethics program and being the liaison with the government. Then the whole corporation had some of that. So I went to Los Angeles and then I ran the program for the whole corporation out of Los Angeles and was involved in national groups for ethics in business and all of that kind of thing, which some people always throw at us as an oxymoron. But so I left and I married and had had children, but we were practiced. The children were all, you know, got their sacraments and raised in a Catholic home, et cetera, et cetera. I don't have any bitterness or anything against the church, nor did I have any desire to do, you know, people asked me to do a wedding here or a wedding there. I didn't want to be involved in that at all. So I signed an agreement that I wouldn't do that stuff. So I kept it. And then after Janice died, I decided that I didn't want to just sit around. So I went to the diocese, and most bishops wouldn't talk to you if you were over 60. I was 72. So the cardinal was all in and supported me through Rome, and it was not an easy road through Rome, etc. So, but I was always interested in I think to some extent when you're, you know, there's a priest who wrote a book recently, the Scottish priest who kind of outed Keith O'Brien, the cardinal in Scotland, and he's had it with the church. But he said, kind of like the Democratic Party, that he didn't, that he wanted to leave the priesthood, but the priesthood wouldn't leave him. And I think there's some of that is true. It isn't that you go around saying, I'm a priest, I'm a priest, I'm a priest, et cetera, et cetera. But there is a certain prism through which you see reality, I think, that when you've been educated and more importantly, served as a priest, stays with you. And so, you know, that prism was operative when I was interested in something or something like that. My wife didn't have any problems with anything like that. So that's kind of how and then when I came back, I actually took a course at Boston College on the Vatican Council with Rick Gallardi.
Okay.
Yeah. Poor Rick, God help him. He's in very bad shape these days. So
That's what Fred said.
yeah. And well, I mean, I had some emails with him and he's handling it okay, but it's the end point isn't very good at all. So, so I find this kind of thing interesting. In fact, I'm going to dinner on Saturday night with two professors from the theology department at DC who are parishioners. And so you kind of find ways of keeping up with something if you're interested in it. That's kind of what I did. So.
Well, I've been impressed. You really, I mean, you really did. You have a pretty good theological mind. By the way, you know, probably one of the best things I ever did as a pastor, and it happened on the anniversary of the Second Vatican Council. I started a book study, and I had never done a book study, but I used Gallardi's keys to the council.
Right.
To the council, and it was a great. And it started I thought it would just be. I said, if anybody's interested, I'll start. I've never done a book club. I don't know how to do it, but this is a book. It's the 50th anniversary of the Second Vatican Council. I had 40 people.
Wow.
I had to create a whole different. I mean, I actually had to rewrite the book because I thought it was simple enough, but they don't have theological minds. So,
Right.
But I've always been impressed by him. So.
His course was incredible learning experience for me because here I am grandpappy, you know, there were most of the students, there were 4 doctoral students and 14 masters in religion and theology students. And the level of theological discussion was very, very high, very substantial. And it really crossed me that across the street, within walking distance, is the diocesan seminary, and they don't come over and take advantage of this.
Yeah. Oh.
And that's because I think there were what Bob alluded to in terms of, was it Cincinnati, the seminary that is going backwards rather than forwards. I said this before, I think they're afraid of the world.
Yeah.
Ay, Dios. Yeah, just a quick question about what's going on at the North American College. Is the impression that this new guy's come in and he has a student body that has only been learning the Latin Mass and is wedded to it, and boy, are they going to be pissed. And lots of luck on handling that. Or was the thought that when they said they were taught the Latin Mass, was that just in case they were interested in saying the Latin Mass, they had the opportunity to learn it? Or was it curricular and better learn it?
My
don't know.
impression is, first of all, if they're pissed at the current rector, because he's the one who immediately, acted on Francis's decision, no more formation of priests of seminarians to become, be doing the Latin Mass. I think that's first thing. My sense is that it was a selection, that you weren't forced to learn how to say the Latin Mass. Now, I may be wrong on that, but I don't think that kind of chewed up the whole North American College approach. That would be my sense. I know nothing about the rector who is still there, but he must have allowed it to get into the seminary there to start. And that was probably an outcome of Benedict kind of letting it loose. And so, bishops from around the country, North America always wants every bishop in the country to send candidates, over to North American College so they have a full house. And a lot of the very conservative bishops would want their priests to know how to say the Mass in Latin. And then I think there probably were seminarians that somehow or other that bee got in their bonnet. And so they thought, oh, this will be very interesting. And so they jumped in. I think that seminarians, and Frank, maybe you would be in touch with this more than I am. I don't think seminarians for many, many, many years now had to study Latin. I may be wrong.
No.
Well, when
No, they
Tim
didn't.
asked if these young priests understand Latin well enough to say the Latin Mass, imagine what happens if they try to say the breviary in Latin.
Well, they can do that in English, or they can learn their Latin there, but they miss a lot of meaning, which I think is the problem. That was the great change to do the vernacular, at least for the reading of the scriptures. I preach for Unbound across the country, and over 4 or 5 years, something like that I've been working with them. And I think I've had 4 instances of one of the parishes that I've gone to. I had 4 requests to say the Mass in Latin, and everything. The only thing that was proclaimed in English, as I recall, was the gospel, period, end of story, and everything else was in Latin.
And was that in the Tridentine Rite, or was it in the Novus Ordo Rite?
Yeah, Tridentine. I had 4 servers, and they held up my, you had to wear the right chasuble and all that kind of stuff. It's the most sterile experience I have of celebrating Eucharist.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, it's sterile. It's absolutely sterile. And of course, it's, I knew how to do it before, but it's just, it's ridiculous.
That's the thing about, you say the young people want reverence. That has nothing to do whether the Mass is in English or Latin, whether it's the Tridentine Rite or the Novus Ordo. That has to do with how a particular presider congregation celebrates the liturgy. I mean, there was a lady in our parish who loved the old stuff. And when she died, she got a priest, a guy named Green. No, not Green. I forget his name now. He was a priest in San Francisco who was coming up to Petaluma, where I live, and said Mass in Latin in the I think, Tom, in the Tridentine Rite, about 5 blocks away from the parish in a hall. And there's about 20 or 30 people who went there. Anyway, she had him come to do her funeral Mass at St. Vincent's. And of course, we have it's a beautiful church, but it does have that back altar that young priests salivate after, you know, to be able to preside. Well, let me tell you, it was, I agree with you, Bob. It was so poorly done. It was so poorly done. I said to myself, you know, God, I just sat there just to watch it, you know, and I had to leave because it was getting late. But it was not well done. And I've told my young seminarian friend who does like the Latin Mass, I said, Christopher, I've seen many Latin Masses that had no reverence whatsoever. The priest just ripping right through them. So it has nothing to do whether it's Latin or Tridentine or Novus Ordo. It's how you do it. You know, whatever you're doing, it's how you do it. You know, so. But you're right. I think, Bob, I think it's sterile. I mean, to me, it's not. It's weird. You know, the first when I was ordained, I went to Healdsburg, and my pastor, Jack O'Hare, there's a lot of people who wanted Latin. You know, it was all those things, Tom, that you talked about, you know, and still wanted the Latin Mass. So one Sunday we did a Latin Mass. We had I think it was 7:30 in the morning. We did the Latin Mass. We did the readings in English, but it was the strangest thing to look at. I think we did face the people though, to look at them and speak Latin. It was weird. and I think and the choir had prepared their the hymns, and after that Mass, I think what people realized, they missed the hymns and nothing else, because nobody ever asked to do it again. Nobody asked us ever to do that again.
Well, remember one thing, in the Tridentine Rite, most of what the priest says in Latin is silent.
Yes, that's right.
As far as the people on the other side of the communion rail are concerned, he could be saying his silent prayers in English.
Yeah.
They don't know the difference because they're inaudible.
Yeah.
I did that once.
You know, I think that there is, I don't think it's necessarily should be connected that seminarians today don't know Latin, and therefore, you know, they can't celebrate that the Tridentine liturgy well. I think there's a value in them knowing Latin, regardless of whether or not it's useful for liturgical celebration. Because if they're going to do some serious work in theology or understanding or reading in the Fathers, they have to know Latin like they have to know New Testament Greek.
Right. Yeah.
So there's a certain sense in which I think the two things get conflated in a way, and that, you know, just not knowing Latin becomes a kind of a sign of where you are, et cetera, rather than a kind of a lack in your ability to fully understand and comprehend and dig into the treasures of church tradition.
You know, I really think one of the things that we as priests need to be able to do, and I kind of think that this concept of the priesthood according to the order of Melchizedek, which I'm not sure where I got all of this, Bob, but you know, in some ways, we are charged with bringing our 2,000 years of faith tradition into the life of the church now with the people who are united with us. You know, we are in some ways mediators of our faith tradition. And in some way, I think we need ourselves then to be in a living way united with and in contact with and in dialogue with the elements of that faith tradition, which I think knowing Latin as well as knowing Greek, or at least knowing how those two languages actually work maybe more so than just being able to read it fluently without a dictionary at your hand.
Right.
You know, that all is part of understanding where we are coming from.
Mhm.
If we don't cultivate something of an understanding of where we are coming from, we don't really know where we are. And I think a part of the problem is people who are extremists in any direction don't really know where they are. They're just saying, this seems good to me at the moment. So,
You know, that I was thinking as we're talking that in the end, I don't have any problems with people who would rather go to a mass that they feel brings them into another dimension, you know, which I think the old liturgy did emphasize, if you will, more the hierarchical or the vertical dimension, you know, the otherness of God as opposed to the immanence of God within the community that is more the liturgy of the church today. But I have no problems with people who, and I can understand that. And I think Pope Francis put his finger on the exact problem, is that it's become, I love the way you said it, Frank, a talisman for people who are against, who rejected. And I used to get very angry when I go to our cathedral, because to me it was an out in your face rejection of the Second Vatican Council. And I said, where is my anger coming from? It's coming from the fact that that's how I was raised, and that's how I was brought into the priesthood. And they're rejecting what formed me as a priest. And so I got pissed off at them, you know. But I think it's the division that's happened in the church that's so open now. And as I said before, I don't think any pope has had to put up with the kind of crap that Francis has had to put up with from this particular segment of
Boy, do I agree. It's outrageous.
I agree too.
So that's my that's the only problem I have with the Latin mass, is that it's the I love the word that you said, the talisman of division.
Mm-hmm.
You know, just a quick aside, what about not only should the mass be in Latin, some argue, but it should be said facing ad orientem. You know, the priest, not only should he be saying mass in Latin, but he has to do it with his back to the people, by golly. And that just strikes me as like, are you serious? You know, I mean.
But maybe, George, if the old mass, if that mass was emphasizing the otherness of God,
Mm-hmm.
and you had the altar rail separating the people from the Holy of Holies, much like, I guess, in the Byzantine tradition, they have those icons and all that sort of stuff. So the priest is the mediator between the people and God, who's above them. So his back to them on behalf of the people, you know, looking up to God, it makes sense to me.
Does it have to be so damned either or? Really?
Oh, Tom, as a layman who, you know, has been for the last 50 years looking priests in the eye while they say mass, it's just so much engaging.
Yeah.
We're the priest and I are doing the same thing.
Can you get out of the limitations of the particular conceptual rut that you are in, and see that there are perhaps other alternative ways of looking at it that could enrich your own experience?
Oh, sure. In theory, my gripe against these guys is not the mass in Latin, it's their fanaticism over it and hostility.
Okay, I absolutely agree there.
Yeah,
but I think if we, you know, the key, and I think Benedict was one who kind of favored this. You know, I don't think Benedict was so much opposed to Mass facing the people as he was, let's consider that there is also some value to seeing the unified people of God celebrating the Eucharist with the presider actually leading the pilgrim people in the same direction.
Right.
That everybody is facing the same direction. It's
Right.
not that they are looking at his back. It is that they
No,
are
I
all
can see
facing the
that,
same
sure.
direction. Yeah.
In fact, I think that the term, the priest with his back to the people, really came into common use when the priest turned around with his front to the people. I don't remember as a child ever kind of using that particular term. The priest has his back to the people. And
Right.
and what has happened is there's an undertone of insult there as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the notion that the priest is leading the people towards God was there. The only interesting quirk in all of that is that when a priest gets buried, he's always in the middle aisle facing the people. A dead priest has been looking at the people for centuries.
Now, supposing the priest gets cremated, how do they face?
There's a lens on.
Is that hot media or cool media? No.
Right. Right. If we could just all get a little bit more inclusive and see the value of the positions that we don't really fully identify with, but maybe can add a little bit to our own perspective, that would probably help our conversations a lot also.
Yeah.
Are you
Well,
talking about politics or the church right now?
Both.
Well,
Both.
both probably, but I'm talking about I'm talking specifically about what we've been talking about, which is
No,
particular liturgical forms that folks are arguing about.
I agree. I was just being smart.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd be interested in whatever time we have left. I think probably
Today or in life?
Pardon?
Today, Bob,
Today.
or in life?
Today. It seems to me that the church is struggling to hold people together.
Mhm.
That we've got these big churches now, and it used to be loaded with people, and I think they had their own ways of doing things. And people are losing that sense of belonging to something that is important to them. What do we need to do to hold people into those larger congregations, and is that good? Or is the alternative of having small groups, and a parish consists of loads of small groups, little communities that they establish amongst themselves and grow in. And it seems to me there's a lot of interest in moving in that direction. They can still belong to the parish. Maybe they'll only come for Mass once a month, where there's 2 or 3 gathered together in a home, and they have serious prayer and sharing and reading of the scriptures and that sort of thing, and having a Mass at home amongst themselves. What's the direction that's going to be healthiest for the church?
Mhm.
Go forward from here.
Shouldn't those small groups come together though every week for Mass?
I think so.
Well, that would be one of the dimensions, but they would the Mass would have a different dynamic because they're deepening spirituality is a much more communal exchange than what happens when they come to the big Mass. I think that's part of the benefit.
Bob, wasn't there a time in the last number of years, I remember exploring all of that, the comunidades de base, how the church exists in Latin America.
Yes.
Forget the name of the priest who, in this country, who was kind of pushing small Christian communities, that experience, because the small group experience, like in the RCIA, that's one of the a very powerful experience for people when you used to dismiss the catechumens at mass and they would go off. And I found that that's when they really grew an awful lot, was in that sharing of the scripture together,
Yes.
and it seemed to me that a lot of parish renewal stuff focused on the small group experience, or that small Christian community. So that, I think, I'm no longer in active parish ministry, and COVID pretty well put the kibosh on a whole lot of stuff. But I know there was a strong, that was just one of the things that was going on. Is it still? I don't know if it's still going on or not. So.
Yeah, I think the RCIA is a good example, but I would say in most places, at least in the parish I ran, you finish the RCIA, they got baptized, they entered the church, and it's over.
I know.
And then they're in the big crowd, And it seems to me the healthier thing that has evolved. I'm thinking of the Catholic family movement that goes all the way back to the 60s. That was a small group. And when I was a newly ordained priest, one of the best friends that I had from when I first met this guy, he was a counselor. He died 2 years ago, I think at 93 or something like that. But they had these wonderful gatherings in the group's homes. They would move from home to home, had wonderful conversations, wonderful, focus on the church and that sort of thing. I'm not sure there's much of that happening now.
Yeah,
I don't think there is.
so
Yeah.
That would have been very priest intensive though, wouldn't it?
Well, they didn't have to have a priest.
Mhm.
They wanted a priest, but I don't think they had to have a priest.
no.
Program designed so they could get together and really talk about their faith.
I don't know what's going on. I have to leave pretty quickly here, but I don't know. I remember that all that small group stuff, Bob, was very much a part of, trying to do parish ministry.
Mhm.
Our diocese now, though, we have the bishop is pretty well. I mean, he not too much leadership.
Yeah.
I have to leave, so I just want to wish you all well.
Okay,
Oh,
Gary.
thank you, Gary.
Thank you.
Hi,
Gary.
Yeah, I wonder, should we do something really strange for a change and end a little bit early?
Sure.
Yes, and we can say a prayer.
And then Tim, you can lead us in prayer. And Bob and Frank, are you still with us next
Yeah.
week?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you will have us, I mean, we're like the guests who overstayed their welcome, I think.
Well,
Not yet.
your guest,
yet.
but you are still very, very welcome. At some point, you're probably going to have
Know
to.
your place, George says.
No.
point, we're probably gonna have to have a discussion.
That day has to come, but it's
About that.
not looming.
Yeah.
But
we're
damn it,
fine.
it's such fun to have you guys.
Okay, well, it's
It is
fun to
fun.
be here.
Truly
It is
so.
fun.
Yeah,
Okay,
Thank you.
how about,
thank you for
given all
being,
this going on in Ukraine, we say a couple of Hail Marys. In the name of the Father and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the
Lord
Lord is with thee.
See,
Blessed are you among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Dear Lord, please protect all of the people of the Ukraine. Give them the strength to see this through. Protect their sovereignty, protect their faith. We ask this in your name. Amen.
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 Goodbye, guys.
Okay,
I have
bye-bye.
one question before we go, Tim. What is that on your left behind you?
Oh, it's some carvings of possums.
Oh, possums, okay.
Yeah, you probably don't know what possums are.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
okay.
I discovered one in a rain barrel in in my yard about 20 years ago, dead for quite a
Yeah,
while.
yeah, there is a, they used to be commonly roadkill in this area of North Carolina. And I don't know that people would not go and pick them up off the road and make stew out of them or something like that. But yeah, these were hand carved, and we got them at an outdoor fair up in Blowing Rock, North Carolina years ago. And actually one of them has disappeared. I don't know what happened to him. But anyway, we used to have three: Mama, Daddy, and the little baby, but we only have Mom and Daddy now. So that's what they are.
The baby
They're
grew up
possums.
and left. He probably
I
is
guess so. Yeah.
drowned in somebody's
Awesome.
water fountain.
Tim,
Goodbye, guys.
your congressman, Tim, is
Oh, yeah, I'm so proud to have Madison Cawthorn as my congressman. It's just a source of pride every day. It really is. Thank you, Crook, for bringing that up.
it's a pleasure.
Okay, bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
Amen.
Bye-bye.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.
See you guys.